Now what is sustainability? Imagine that you have money in a bank, you have capital, you put 100 rupees in the bank. That 100 rupees, which is the capital, is giving you interest. As long as you are taking the interest, and spending the interest without touching the capital, then that is sustainability. As soon as you start taking away the capital as well, then you've entered the unsustainable cycle. One of the founders of the MSC was the Unilever Corporation, who at the time were a major seafood retailer. And despite countless fisheries clearly being depleted and destructive, a couple had ever been denied certification in over 20 years. But most shocking of all was learning that over 80% of the almost £30 million a year income was from licensing their logo on seafood. Basically, the more blue ticks they handed out, the more money they made. So as far as people are concerned, they should not gonna trust these labels again. In fact, other attempts to regulate the industry were also failing, with government observers who are given the task of monitoring fishing activity on ships being murdered at sea, thrown overboard, like Keith Davis, a 41-year-old American observer, who in recent years went missing off the coast of Peru, never to be seen again. In Papua New Guinea, 18 observers went missing in the space of just 5 years. And in the Philippines, in 2015, an observer by the name of Ms. Gailey Alpajora received death threats from the family of a tuna fisherman who was arrested for illegal fishing. Soon after, armed men entered her home, and she was assassinated in cold blood with a gunshot to the head in front of her 2 young boys. When we look at fisheries crime, we have to look at it within the context of transnational organized crime. And the same syndicates that are behind illegal fishing are the same criminal groups that are behind drug trafficking, human trafficking, and other crimes. If you get in the way of their business, you are risking your own life. But also don't be surprised at the extent at which governments will go to prevent you from exposing the economic activities that they subsidize at sea. A subsidy is taxpayer money given to an industry to keep the price of a product or service artificially low. And in an increasing number of countries, more money was going out than the value of fish coming back in. So if you don't eat fish, you're still sustaining fisheries because you're paying for it in your taxes. Subsidies were originally started as a means to ensure food security. But ironically, they are now the cause of food insecurity in many developing regions. Fishing by the European Union in places like West Africa is driven by European Union subsidies. And that means that local businesses can't compete with the economic might of the European Union. Really, it's just a continuation of a history of plundering the African continent. These intensive fishing operations weren't only wiping out the fish, they were also destroying economies. In the United States, up to 1 in every 3 wild-caught fish imported had been caught illegally, and therefore sold illegally. Stolen, often from countries in most need, where there are now wars over the fish. One of the causes for the infamous pirates of Somalia, now feared across the world, was actually illegal fishing. They were once humble fishermen working to feed their families. But when Somalia fell to civil war, foreign illegal fishing vessels, the real pirates of today's oceans, invaded their waters and began taking the fish, effectively pulling food from their mouths, giving Somali fishermen no choice but to move into another line of work. This plundering of the African coast, though, was happening across the continent. And Sea Shepherd was on a daring mission to end this, working with governments to track down and arrest illegal fishing vessels in places like Liberia. Why the ocean around West Africa was so worth protecting. It was home to one of the last strongholds of life in our oceans. Teeming with rare and wonderful wildlife of all kinds. Countless species journeyed across the Atlantic Ocean to find themselves in these waters. A refuge for mating and feeding. Living in as close to harmony and balance as I'd ever seen. But there was another species, journeying to these waters for a very different purpose. It didn't take long to witness how Sea Shepherd and the Liberian Coast Guard tracked down and boarded fishing vessels. Species you might have never seen in your entire life were dying in the nets before we could even appreciate them. But the scenes continued below deck, where it became clear that these vessels were more like floating slaughterhouses. Fisheries workers at sea have some of the most dangerous jobs on earth. In context, over more than 4,500 US soldiers were killed in the Iraq War over the course of 20 years. But during that same time, 360,000 fisheries workers died doing their job, as an estimated 24,000 workers die every year. And West African canoe fishermen happen to have the highest mortality rates of any fisheries job on the planet. Huge numbers of people depended on the fish, which is now mostly gone. That's caused a great deal of hunger, not just on the coast, but up to 1,000 miles inland. So, what do people do for fishing instead? They'll hunt wild animals on land. And that has not only had devastating impacts on animal life on land, it also seems to have had a very major impact on human life, because it's the bushmeat trade which is responsible for the Ebola epidemics. You can actually stand this up, it's in the scientific literature. The theft of fish stocks is enhancing or causing Ebola outbreaks of West Africa. You all must question yourself whether there is any alternative fishing method that could provide some kind of solution to both the environmental and humanitarian ramifications of this industry. And a glimmer of hope presented itself in the form of fish farming, an industry with the reputation of being an eco-friendly way to feed the world without all the problems of wild-caught fish. With no bycatch, no illegal fishing, no seafloor damage, no killing of endangered species, and no dangerous working conditions, it was exactly what we might be looking for. Yeah, so a lot of people jump to the conclusion that sustainable seafood comes from farming fish and not high seas fishing, but it's really not the case. There are so many issues involved with farming fish, being pollution, disease, and we have to ask the question, what are these fish being fed? The industry claimed that to produce 1 kilogram of farmed salmon, only 1.2 kilograms of feed is needed. But when you look further, you can find the feed is heavily processed, and is made of dried fish meal and extracted fish oil, which requires a massive amount of fish to produce. So in reality, you need many times more fish going into the farmer's feed than will ever come out. So fish farming was just wild fishing in disguise. And what made this even more shocking was the scale fish farming already operates at. Today, around 50% of the world's seafood is coming from farms like these. Huge cages in the ocean containing tens of thousands of fish. Scotland is one of the world's leading producers of farmed salmon. Since none of the major companies wanted to speak to us, we decided to meet with some of the industry's whistleblowers instead. The salmon farming industry in Scotland is extremely powerful. And we're talking about billion-dollar multinationals, which have the resources and the skills to dominate the narrative, and ensure that the only information that gets out is the information they're comfortable with. It was sad to think that this incredible species, which had evolved for millions of years to migrate across entire oceans and navigate up rivers to reach the exact same spawning grounds they were born in, were now confined to swim in circles in their own filth. So, it's estimated that each salmon farm in Scotland produces organic waste equivalent to a town of 10 to 20,000 people. And taken together, it's estimated that the Scottish salmon farming industry produces organic waste equivalent to the entire population of Scotland each year. Maybe 50% of the salmon are dying from egg to plate, from hatch to catch. These fish are dying from anemia, lice infestation, infectious diseases, chlamydia, heart disease. So, far from being a panacea for the world food problem, salmon farming is a waste of resources. It's biological nonsense. But the environmental impact of farming marine life didn't end with fish. One of the world's most important habitats is mangroves. Now, mangrove forests are absolutely crucial storm barriers. They protect communities from storm surges, even from tsunamis. And yet, 38% of the world's mangroves have been destroyed by shrimp and prawn farming. I hope you liked the video. Thanks for watching.